Hello, everyone. Very happy to have another young Indian with us, part of the Voice of the Young series. Right now, we have with us Yash Tayal. Let's listen to him. Over to you, Yash.
Good evening, sir. Firstly, I would like to thank you for having me on this platform. And I would like to start with this brief introduction about me before I go into the presentation that I have prepared for this talk. So, like you already mentioned, my name is Yash Tayal. I'm from Visakhapatnam in Andhra Pradesh. And I did my undergrad from Christ University in economics honors. After that, I had a brief stint as an associate consultant at Econ, which was an HR consulting firm. I was working in the DEI vertical over there primarily. After that, currently I'm pursuing a master's in economics at Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research in Mumbai. And today I would like to talk about a very widely discussed topic, which is inequality in India. And I have prepared a presentation for that. I'll just putting that up. So, as you can see, the primary question over here is: does India have an inequality problem? And before I start, this is a topic that has been of quite some interest to me ever since I started economics. I always wondered about why we have these divides in society, where you have very rich people who have tons of wealth and tons of money at their disposal. They spend it on lavish things, and then on the other side, you have so many poor people. You have so many farmers that are committing suicide because they don't have some amount of money to pay off the debt. And before we go into the entire idea of whether India has an inequality problem or not, I would like to focus on why inequality matters. And over here, I've picked four reasons. There might be many more, but I would like to highlight these four. Firstly, it hurts long-term economic growth, and this is evident through lower aggregate demand. Now, we know that the rich have a lower propensity to consume compared to the poor. Hence, if you have a lot of the income and the wealth in a country accumulated at the top of the distribution, that is, a few people have a lot of the income and a lot of the wealth in the country, you would see lower aggregate demand because even though they might spend it on more lavish items, they end up saving more than the poor. The poor end up spending more of their income as a proportion than the rich. And that leads to lower aggregate demand, which hurts long-term economic growth. Secondly, you see lower productivity. Why? Because with inequality, you have limited access to education that goes towards the poor. The poor don't have enough money to send their children to schools, and that leads to limited access to education, which also leads to limited access to opportunities for lower income groups, and that reduces productivity. And very interestingly, there is empirical evidence on this by the IMF and OECD studies that show that countries with lower inequality tend to sustain longer growth rates. Secondly, we have the weakening of social mobility. Every country, like for example, the well-known American dream shows that no matter where you start from, you can reach a certain level if you work hard enough, and that's only possible through social mobility. However, if you have very high inequality and uh, you don't do enough for the lower sections of your country, you see an inequality in opportunity where children's futures depend more on their parents' income than their own talent or effort. And that leads to an intergenerational trap where many capable individuals remain trapped in low income jobs due to lack of access to quality education and networks. So, social mobility is a very key thing that you need to ensure exists in a country. And that's something that does not happen if you have a lot of inequality in your country. Then we have the undermining of poverty reduction. Now, we read usually that if you have high economic growth, you tend to alleviate more people out of poverty in your country. And that is why the main focus always for any economy is to grow. We grow as much as we can so that people come out of poverty because it's more important to have people out of poverty than to have an equal country by some extent. However, if you ensure that the distribution of this growth is more equal and it's not concentrated at the top 1% or the top 10% or the top 20%, you ensure that the benefits of this trickle down to the poorer sections and more people come out of poverty. Hence, it's very important to have an equal society to ensure that there's poverty reduction at a greater extent. And I'll also focus on this in the next slide a bit. And lastly, you have the final, according to me, the final reason why equality matters is that lack of inequality erodes democracy in institutional trust. You see a political capture, which is something that's very evident both in India and in the US, where wealth concentration allows elites to shape policies in their favor through lobbying and influence. And we are seeing this in India largely, and as well as the US. And this leads to erosion of faith in institutions, and that leads to social unrest. And you don't want your country to be in a sense of civil fights. That is always bad for your country, which is why, again, inequality matters in this as well. And after this, I would like to focus on what are the drivers of inequality. And over here, as you can see, the first point I mentioned is globalization. Now, globalization, especially in India, you had the 1991 reforms, liberalization, privatization, and globalization, the LPG reforms. They propelled us into a completely different path. Although, what it also led to was to an increase in inequality in India. What happens during globalization is that it raises the returns to mobile or skilled factors like capital and educated labor, while leaving immobile or low skilled workers behind. And because poorer workers are less able to move or adapt, they capture fewer benefits, causing inequality to widen. There's actually a very interesting paper on this by an economist called, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name right, but Topolova. I saw her work mentioned in Banerjee and Dufflo's book, Good Economics for Hard Times. In that, what she has done is she looked at 600 different districts in India when the 1991 reforms came in. And she looked at whether the rate of poverty reduction in these districts differed by how much these LPG reforms impacted these districts. And she found that in districts that were affected by the LPG reforms, by a larger extent, the rate of poverty reduction was lesser than the other districts. So eventually, due to globalization, poverty reduction was evident across all the districts, but the rate differed, and the rate was lower in the districts where there was higher impact of globalization. Secondly, we have technological progress, which also drives inequality in somewhat of a similar fashion as globalization, where you have automation and digitization, which increases productivity, which displaces routine and low-skilled jobs and helps skilled workers. And lastly, you have domestic economic policies, where you have to ensure that as a country, you have policies that focus on redistribution of wealth and income. If you don't have that, then you're leaving behind the entire section of your economy, like the lower income groups. You leave them behind and you fail to uplift them and give them a chance to achieve what they want to achieve. Now that we have this out of the way, the importance of the topic of inequality, I would like to focus on inequality in India currently. And inequality in India currently can be described as somewhat of a data dilemma, because when you look further into it, does India actually have an inequality problem? The answer is contested using different data sets, methodologies, and interpretations. And I was able to largely narrow it down to three narratives that we have. And these three narratives differ widely. And these three narratives, the government's claim, Piketty's estimate, and Indian economists. Firstly, I would like to focus on the government's claim. This is something that's very recent. This came out in July of 2025, where the government's PIB, which is the Press Information Bureau, claimed that India was the fourth most equal country in the world. But once you dive deeper into that claim, you find that they use the Gini coefficient of 25.5. Gini coefficients, for anybody who doesn't know, is the lower the Gini coefficient, the better it is, and the higher the Gini coefficient, it ranges from 0 to 100. The higher the Gini coefficient, the more unequal the country is. They calculated the Gini coefficient of 25.5 and claimed that India was the fourth most equal country in the world. However, they failed to focus on the fact that this was based on India's household consumption expenditure survey. And a consumption based Gini is usually more equal than an income based Gini. And what they did was they pitted this consumption-based Gini coefficient against the income-based Gini coefficient of other countries and claimed that India is the fourth most equal country in the world, which was not the case. The Household Consumption Expenditure Survey's methodology has itself been questioned, although they have updated it to follow international norms. So I won't be going into that. However, they, like I said, they took a consumption-based Gini. Now, why is a consumption-based Gini more equal than an income-based Gini? That's because where you see a difference between the rich and the poor is in their savings, not in the consumption. Yes, they consume more lavish items, they might spend more in consumption, But the main inequality that occurs is through the wealth accumulation, through the savings. So the moment you remove savings from the equation and you compare only the consumption, you see a very less amount of inequality between the rich and the poor. And that is exactly what is shown in the consumption-based Gini coefficient over here. Now, the second narrative on Indian inequality that actually made me interested in this topic to begin with is Piketty's estimate. So, Piketty, along with Chancel, Bharti, and one other author, published a paper which talked about the rise of inequality in India, the rise of the billionaire Raj. In that, they claim that the Gini coefficient, again, remember, 0 to 100, the higher you are, the worse off it is. They claim that the Gini coefficient for India was a staggering 62. And that seemed very bad. And that is what has mostly been used in global estimates of India's inequality. However, when you dive deeper again, you see a lot of Indian economists have pointed out that Piketty's estimate and Piketty's methodology has a few flaws in itself. Firstly, Piketty uses a lot of tax records, and the Gini is estimated using pre-tax income, whereas it should be used, whereas it should be calculated using post-tax income. And on top of that, a few other estimates in other countries as well, even in the US, where you have a lot of rich data, which is not available in India. In the US, you get a lot of rich data. Even the estimates there by Piketty have been questioned by economists in the US. And largely in India, he has used a plethora of data sources. If you look at the paper, he has used 10 to 12 different data sources, but even then, his estimates have been questioned and his methodology has been questioned. The same estimates that he has given earlier have increased based on, uh, again, unexplained circumstances and unexplained reasons. So while Piketty's estimate is a bit more staggering, could be closer to the truth, it's still again not 100% back because again, you don't have income data in it. And that is why it's a dilemma. It's a data dilemma. You don't have good income. You don't have any, not just good, you don't have any income based data in India that is collected by the government at a national level. Lastly, you have the third narrative where you've got the Indian economists that try to find a middle ground between this, between the government's claim and Piketty's estimate. They claim that Piketty's estimate is exaggerated and inequality in India is not as bad as Piketty claims it to be. But obviously, they don't claim that India is the fourth most equal country in the world because they know that's a consumption-based Gini. Here, what I've seen Indian economists use is a survey by Price, which is an independent think tank. It's a private think tank, and they conduct an actual survey, income survey, where they try to get an idea of the income distribution of India. And according to them, the Gini coefficient again is 41. Now, the problem with income surveys, as we'll see later on as well in the history of income surveys that India has conducted at the national level, uh, income surveys are notoriously unreliable with people largely underreporting income. And that's been a common problem. And if we come onto the next slide, you'll see that India's history with income surveys, the National Sample Survey has conducted experimental modules on income alongside consumption and expenditure in multiple rounds, but suffered from issues like underreporting and data inconsistencies. Then in the 1980s, they had a pilot survey, which they failed to scale up because they faced difficulties again as income estimates being lower than with income estimates being lower than combined figures of consumption and savings, indicating underreporting once again. So looking at all of this and looking at all of the debate around inequality in India, Mosty has actually constituted a technical expert group to guide a 2026 survey on the income distribution in India, where they will draw lessons from international experiences and previous domestic challenges. Now, I say that this is a glimmer of hope because it's increasingly important for us to understand what the income distribution of India is like. Right now, all we have are cost estimates that are completely in the mud, that keep getting challenged here and there by different economists. The moment we have a nice representative sample survey on the income of households in India, it helps in better policy making. But again, like I mentioned, this is a very difficult thing to do, and people struggle to do it. A pre-test for the upcoming 2026 survey found that 95% of respondents were unwilling to share income details. So it's going to be a very difficult task for India to achieve, but I hope it manages to do that because it will teach us a lot about the income distribution in India and it will inform policy making to a large extent. And lastly, to answer the question, so does India have an inequality problem? Well, a country with over 8 lakh millionaires and 350 plus billionaires that still has to provide free range to 80 plus crore citizens cannot claim to be an equal country. So the honest answer should be yes. India exhibits significant inequality, but the extent of it cannot be known unless we actually get a proper data representing the Indian households and their income distributions. So over here, I have not elaborated on different headline grabbing facts like the fact that during the COVID period, you had India in one of the worst health crises of its independent era, and during that same time period, we saw a rise in billionaires in India, and most of them ended up being from the healthcare sector. I've not focused on different facts like that. The main idea over here is to focus on the fact that we do not have quality data on the income distribution, like of the distribution of income in India. And we might move towards that with the survey that's coming up in 2026, and the results of which should be out by, I guess, 2027. But until then, all we can make are guess, like basic estimates. And we need to be sure of what we see. Like if we see a headline that claims that India is the fourth most equal country in the world, we need to dive deeper into it to ensure that it means it's the right thing. And the same thing goes for headlines that suggest otherwise. But until we get a representative sample survey, we need to be sure as to what we are looking at, and we need to dive deeper into the data to ensure that we understand what it's trying to is. And with that, I would like to end this. Thank you.
Yes, let's get out of the screen share.
Oh,
Well, thank you, Yash. That was an excellent analysis and summary of what we have. And I think, this is generally not my place to have a discussion. And I will stop myself from saying too much, but I want to add one point, which is not critical or supportive of what you've said. And that is that we are a young country. And for us, the equality of opportunity is very important. You sort of hinted at this in the first few slides. That, what is the problem? The problem of that is not, as you rightly pointed out, the problem is not that there is unequal income, but you pointed out that there is long-term growth problems. So that is coming from the inequality of opportunity. And I think I would like everybody young like you to, of course, understand the debate about wealth and income inequality, of course, but also to focus on the inequality of opportunity. Because it is the inequality of opportunity that wastes your talent among the poor people. Because, to put it bluntly, if you are a very smart young kid born in a Narega family, your talent will never come forward. We are wasting that talent. Okay, look at this year's Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. Palestine origin, living in Jordan in conditions similar to what Narega families might be. One room house for the whole family, no electricity, no water, no opportunity. Father somehow gets him to the US, no English. How will he know? No English. US accepts him in some college whose name nobody's ever heard of. Goes from there to, that's a pre-college, goes to a college whose name people outside the US have not heard of. Right? But by now he's fluent and he's smart, right? And then he gets into a master's program, and then he does his PhD, and then he gets a Nobel Prize. Okay? All in my lifetime, So we have such talent in India. But like Jordan and Palestine didn't give him an opportunity. We don't give them an opportunity. And we don't even have a program. If you look at the new education policy 2020, They have a program for gifted and talented. Right? They have some paragraphs. Nobody even reads them except me. Read them and you feel like crying. Okay. Look, this is equality of opportunity for gifted, and especially for gifted and talented. Then this is not equality of opportunity. Okay. So we need to focus a bit more, not a bit more. In a young country, the growth will come from the huge numbers of people becoming 16, 17, 18, entering the labor force. What has happened to them? And there's another part of the new education policy 2020, which is right in chapter 1, and nobody reads it. Nobody is even aware of it. But it's there. And it says that the real development takes place at ages 0 to 3. And we are going to do something about it. Okay. Now, it is true that if you are getting the necessary health, I mean, you can't have education, but some inputs, love, talking, all these kinds of things, it's laid out there. But it's laid out in a very unsatisfactory way, but it's there. And obviously, it isn't working. But I would say that the inequality of opportunity arises at the age 0 to 3. After that, you are just playing catch up. So you get them you get them in class 9, and according to Acer reports, they probably can't read grade 6 material because Acer says grade 5 cannot read grade 2 and cannot do the sums of grade 1. So then they are 14 years old and you say, oh, I'm going to do remedial education. It's hopeless at that point. You cannot catch up. So I would say, I say to many young people, especially to you, that look at 0 to 3. What is the inequality in the age group 0 to 3 and what can be done about it? Because what the government of India writes is that the ashas in Anganwadis will take care of those children, 0 to 3. Okay. Now, anybody who knows India knows that the ashas are underpaid and overworked already, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So now you're asking them to do something else, which is the key to growth at that age, right? The development. And they cannot do it. So simple. If you ever, I don't go there, but I hear from people that look, sir, the ashas, they are dedicated, but they have no job security, they have no growth path of income, years of experience mean nothing. And how can they remain so motivated that they will take on something which is brand new and now they have to do it and deliver it? And where is the chain of command up to this top where somebody is saying, tell me what's happening at 0 to 3? It isn't there.
And
So,
in fact, the Ashas are on protest in Kerala.
yeah, they
They are
are.
on protest since I don't know how many months because
Yeah,
they want the basic minimum wage and the government is not giving that to them. And if you look at
correct.
other states, Ashas earn much lesser and they already have to handle the entire health department in villages. And on top of that, you want to assign education to them. That's like health and education to underpaid workers. How is that going to work?
No, it's not.
It's,
Okay, so the thing is that
exactly.
that's why I bring it to your attention because you are a person who thinks about these things. That your real future inequality is baked in at 0 to 3, probabilistically speaking. Okay, I mean, the evidence is clear. Do you know Professor Heckman in econometrics? Heckman's equations? Okay, look it up. Okay, you'll get Heckman has a website
Hmm.
based on his econometric research from 0 to 3. Okay. And he says, guys, the game's over at age 6. You're just going through the paces because the fundamental brain development, there is a curve there showing the brain development. It starts 3 months before the child is born. Okay. If you don't take care of the child in those 3 months, you're already hampering the brain. Okay. And then there's a chart that shows how the brain develops. And okay, by the time you're 12, okay, your brain's done. Now you can put
Yeah.
into it whatever you want, but the brain is done. It's cooked. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 0 to 3, please bring that not to your knowledge. And then
Sure.
think about equality of opportunity, generally speaking, and
Hmm.
especially with the focus on 0 to 3. That's just what I want to add to your thinking and analysis and knowledge, because
Right.
anybody I talk to about 0 to 3 just says, I've never heard of it. And yet it is in chapter 1 of the new education policy. And nobody reads it because nobody reads a document except me. And nobody cares because the press doesn't report it. The journalists don't know, public policy people don't know, nobody knows, but it's there. It's there because it is widely accepted. And smart countries, young, small countries, smart countries, they devote an enormous amount of subsidy to that. Finland. Because they know the game's over, guys, by the time they're 6. Now you can say it's not 0 to 3, it's 0 to 5. Okay, fine. I'm not an expert enough to argue that because the new education policy lists, I think, 0 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 8. These are all quibbles. Nothing is happening. Nothing is happening. And that's where we are baking in the future inequality because these kids, they don't stand a chance. They don't, the schools are rotten. Health is poor of the parents. The money is not there. They're living on subsidized food. Subsidized healthcare doesn't reach them. Nobody says that they are. Until a few years ago, we used to say 30% of the kids are stunted. Maybe it's now 15%.
Yeah.
Okay. But that 15% is the underclass. Because if they are stunted, I mean, what do you expect in productivity? You have no
Exactly.
human investment there. So you are baking into the future. Suppose they are not stunted. Suppose we get enough food. We are not food short and we can distribute the food. Okay, I agree, we could do that. But the real development is not just eating food. Look up what 0 to 3 needs. It's available in the press. Okay, it's available. Just get your AI to give you a summary of what is needed and they'll tell you what is needed. Okay, so let me stop there on this issue. I just leave it to you, and I will discuss something practical with you offline. But let's get to your other side. I mean, you you've lived in big cities, Vizag, Bengaluru, now Mumbai. Do you also travel around?
No, I've not traveled around, but yeah, and you can add Gurgaon to that list because I was working in Gurgaon for a year.
Gurgaon, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So, how do you feel about these cities? What's your experience? What's your view? Do you
Oh,
enjoy?
well,
Which one
I
do you
absolutely.
enjoy?
I'm sorry, what?
Which one did you enjoy the most? Your hometown?
Yeah, my hometown's amazing because you've got mountains, you've got the beach, and even Bangalore was amazing. Mumbai has been pretty kind to me as well. Gurgaon, on the other hand, the pollution gets to you. That's the most difficult part of Gurgaon, the pollution and the winter. Otherwise, all the cities have been pretty kind. I've enjoyed every city so far.
Okay. I mean, you presented a pretty serious analysis. How about something lighter about you that we can get to know you better?
Right.
Or you have no
Um,
lighter side?
no,
You
okay,
can you
something
can
that's
you can say I'm an economist. We don't have a lighter side.
uh,
What do you
but
expect?
I do actually have a very interesting fact that I have performed stand-up comedy twice during my lifetime. I think that's a pretty light thing to
That's pretty
mention.
light. Yeah, that's light. Okay.
Uh,
Where was the stand-up comedy?
no, this was not somewhere professional. It was during school. I did it once in 11th and once in 12th. So.
Okay. Now, I mean, stand-up comedy has become much more prominent in India than it used to be.
Yeah, true.
Yes, and uh, you have any favorites?
I love Karunesh Salgar and Varun Ko. Do you know them by any chance?
No, I don't know those two names. I don't see that often, but
Okay.
do you have a sense of what are the topics they cover? I'm very keen to get that. What do they cover?
Well, Varun Grover
Oh,
covers
Varun
political
Grover. Yes,
comedy.
Varun Grover. I've
Yeah,
seen.
yeah. Varun
Yes,
Grover, you might, right?
I've
He's
seen. Yes.
he's an amazing writer, yeah. So, he covers political comedy amazingly. In a way, comedy has become kind of a gateway to talk about politics in India because the media doesn't do it anymore. But yeah, Varun Grover is pretty good. And Karunesh Salwar again, nothing political, mostly about politics.
Yeah, it's very tough to poke fun in India. It's very tough. Everybody is hypersensitive. Everybody is hypersensitive. So what I see very often is that the people just make fun of the way of Indian life, you know, just middle class family life. Oh,
Mhm.
we keep our sofas covered with plastic, and this is what your grandmother says to you, which is just poking fun at our
Yeah.
way of life. And very rarely
Mhm.
we get something that is even mildly controversial. But yes, there are controversial people who do say a few things, right? Comedy is a poking, actual poking, rather than just telling a joke. All right. Anything else?
Nothing else. I love playing football and I'm a huge Manchester City fan. That that's been a constant for I think for the past 10 years.
Okay. All right. Good. So let me ask you this. What's your future as you see it?
Yeah. So my future is pretty set for now. I plan to do a PhD after my masters and then become a professor. That's
Okay.
the path that I've chosen for myself.
All right. Wonderful. Welcome to the club. Card
Thank
carrying,
you.
card carrying eggheads. Welcome to the club. All right. Good. It's time to, I think I want to talk to you offline. So let's end it here. But before we end it, the final word. What's your message?
Um, my message is going to be that inequality, especially as a topic, it's very important to look into it, especially in India. It informs a lot of the decisions that the government makes and a lot of the decisions that we make. So people should be wary of the different data sources and you should not just follow headlines and you should dive deeper what they need.
Okay. Let's end it here today. Thank you, Yash. It was a
Thank
very,
you.
let me say it again, a very well informed analysis with the proper data and everything. So well done as an fellow economist. Let's end it here today. I'll be back with another young person or an expert. Stay online. I have some things to discuss.